Hey everyone, welcome back to the Phoenix's Tale, the weekly Harry Potter themed podcast where I am sharing my life story through a chapter by chapter analysis of the entire Harry Potter book series. I am your host, Gabe, and this week we are diving into Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, chapter 9, The Midnight Duel. So, let's get to our recap real quick. Before I do that, though, again, my apologies for the tardiness of this episode. This should have been posted last week, the 16th. But as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, or a couple episodes ago, been having some struggles with my own mental health over the last month or so now. So I'm just doing the best I can, and we're going to get caught up this week, and hopefully I can stay focused and stay on track. So, again, my apologies for the tardiness of this episode. We will be back on track with this episode and the next episode, Chapter 10, Halloween. And then we'll just go on from there. So, something that I would very much like to say to everybody, for those of you who are struggling right now with your own mental health issues, regardless of what they are, go easy on yourself when you have those moments where you just can't do anything. And that just surviving is extremely difficult, which I will admit has been the case for me over the last month or so. It's so easy for us to beat ourselves up for not being perfect, for not being able to do better. But when you stop and think of what's really going on when we are struggling through those moments where just getting out of bed and facing the day, even if we don't do anything for the day except binge watch Netflix or, doom scroll on our phones on social media, it's let yourself have those days. That's your body telling you that you need to slow down, that you need some rest, that you need to take care of yourself. And I have found that leaning into that more, I would say within the last year and a half, when I have these moments, has actually made a huge difference. And just keep reminding myself, my body's telling me something I need to listen to. Today's not the day to force anything that I cannot do. So we're going to rest. It has made those moments a lot easier to navigate when I do hit those moments. So I just wanted to take a moment out to let you know, one, just for full transparency, I'm giving you everything authentically that I'm experiencing currently, through my journey right now. And I know how difficult it can be. I would beat myself up for not being as productive as I would like, despite my body saying, no, time out, time out. We need to chill. We need to relax. We need to not worry about anything today. Just be lazy. There's nothing important that needs to be done today. So don't worry about it. So I highly encourage those of you who may be struggling to show yourself a lot of grace during those moments, because, like I said, there's a reason why you feel the way you do. Take advantage of it to the best of your ability if you possibly can. Don't make yourself wrong. Don't beat yourself up over it. It is necessary. And it is much more difficult to keep that in mind when you're dealing with a stumbling block, if you will, with your mental health as opposed to physical health. Physical health, you're recovering from a surgery. Oh, that's given that you literally cannot do anything. You're not supposed to lift anything, etc., etc. It's so much easier when it's our physical health than when it's our mental health. But we need just as much care and grace for ourselves in those moments. So that's my public service announcement for the day. So let's dive into chapter 9, The Midnight Duel. With our brief recap, we find in this chapter that Harry's dealing with the hate from Professor Snape, and now he's wondering about that package that he and Hagrid picked up from Gringotts on their trip to Diagon Alley on Harry's birthday. He's also having to deal with Draco Malfoy just being an ass about Harry not receiving any owl post and, his muggle upbringing and, shit like that. In this chapter, the first years begin flying lessons, during which Malfoy, after Neville hurt himself because he was way too nervous about flying and accidentally launched himself into the air on his broomstick, Malfoy steals Neville's Rememberall that he received from his grandmother in the owl post that morning. And Harry, not thinking about the rules and just being pissed off at Malfoy for being an ass, hops on his broom and quickly discovers that he is actually quite a natural at flying. It was the one thing in the magical world, or the first thing in the magical world, now that he knows that he's a wizard and all of his concerns leading up to attending Hogwarts, that he's just going to be so far behind and that there had to have been a mistake and all of this stuff. He's actually finally found something in the wizarding world that he is just naturally good at. And boy, the way it's written throughout the entire series, and we're going to dive more into this specifically when we get to Goblet of Fire. But yeah, Harry is a damn good Quidditch player and a damn good flyer. We'll just leave it at that. So when he's up in the air, going after Malfoy, trying to get Neville's Rememberall back, Malfoy chucks it. Harry goes after it and catches it just before it hits the ground. And of course, Professor McGonagall sees all of this. And instead of punishing him, he puts him on the Gryffindor Quidditch team as a seeker, because Oliver Wood hadn't been able to find a seeker for the team. So now Harry is the youngest Quidditch player at Hogwarts in over a century. They typically don't allow first years to try out. They're not allowed their own broomsticks to be kept at school, anything like that. So being a first year on a Quidditch team at Hogwarts is a huge thing. So, and then when Malfoy sees that Harry hadn't been expelled for the antics during the flying lessons, he challenges Harry to a duel, which Harry not only accepts, but he also arrives at the designated place. Ron's with him. Hermione's with him because, she won't shut up about breaking rules. Neville's with them because he had been released from the hospital wing from his fall earlier, but he can never remember the password. So all of a sudden it's four of them instead of just Harry and Ron going to meet Malfoy for this duel. They find out very quickly that Malfoy set them up, and they start running away from Filch and accidentally find themselves in the forbidden and locked third floor corridor, where they see this ginormous three-headed dog standing on a trap door. So we close the chapter with Harry thinking about, that's where that package that that Hagrid and I picked up, that's where this package went. That dog is guarding this package, whatever it is. So as I was doing my research on this, there were several themes that popped up for me during my research for this episode. That was a little redundant. Sorry about that. The first one has to do with feeling pressure to prove oneself with authority figures. In my case, it was always my father when I was a child. And what was interesting to me about this is that throughout my life, whenever I needed to stand up for myself to my father, I would need my mom's help to kind of boost me up, to help me figure out what I want to say to my father so that I can do so in that kick-ass boss babe, take no shit kind of an attitude. And this speaks to the overwhelming fear I had of my father, because I we never knew what was walking in the door. Excuse me. When he would come home at night after work, and the times that I felt so confused that I'm in trouble for something, he's shouting at me, he's insulting me, he's ridiculing me, and I have no fucking clue why. But obviously I did something wrong. Um yeah, it there was a lot of fear there. I yeah. We're gonna skip it. My brain just went there, and I'm just like, yeah, overwhelming amount of fear, because I always knew how things would work with him, and I knew that any pushback would be met with the same bullshit. And that's when we get into the gaslighting with him, and oh, I never said that, even though the words literally just fell out of his mouth like seconds before that. Um, but again, I knew what was going to happen. No matter what I did or said, I was going to be yelled at, I was going to be insulted, I was going to be ridiculed, etc. But these were moments when I needed to say something. I couldn't let it go. The first one, and this is a big one. Um, this was in September of 1993, and my father was getting married again. Wife number three, my mother being his first marriage. And I mentioned in a previous episode that after my parents divorced, social situations, the annual company picnic that his employer would put on for the employees every year, the company's inter-office softball tournament, because it was a bit of a chain, or franchise, if you will, the company he works for. So there were offices all over California, Oregon. There was one in Denver, which is why I ended up living in Denver for a year when I was in first grade. Um, but they were all just very hellish to me after my parents put it up, because my father didn't care that my brothers and I were there or not. He didn't care if we wanted to go or not. For him, it was all about perception, um, specifically the perception from his colleagues. And I always, whenever I tell this part of the story, it's always like, oh, I'm divorced, but look what a good father I am because I got my kids here, even though he ignored us the entire time we were there. So when the news of his wedding dropped, I immediately didn't want to go. And by that time, I didn't even care that it was an important day to my father. Well, it's your father, and it's a big day for him. You should be there to support him. That no longer mattered, and I was only 22 years old at that point. Um, what comes around goes around, I guess. I didn't care. But I'll spare you the boring details of all that. The end result was that I simply told him that I wasn't going to the wedding, and I didn't. And this was all tied to, if you remember a couple episodes back, I was talking about my epiphany moment. It was the the word vomiting that I was doing at the time had a lot to do with finding a reasonable excuse to not be at his wedding, so that I could, number one, avoid the wedding, but number two, avoid the fallout. Because if I gave my father something good enough, even though he would have been disappointed, he would have, I think, understood. So that's what I was looking for in my epiphany moment that day when my mom asked the question and things finally clicked into place. And it was because of that epiphany moment that I ultimately just said, you know what, fuck it. I'm just going to tell him I don't want to go. I, I don't want to go. And as you might expect, I did get the same bullshit from him. He went on this rant for about 5 or 10 minutes. I don't even know how long it was. I was laughing the whole time because he reacted exactly the way I thought he would. You know, telling me that sometimes you have to do things that you don't want to do, and something about being a bump on the log and being lazy. There's lazy again. But like I said, it was just also funny to me because it was I hit the bullseye on that one. So um, as you might imagine from all that, I have been no contact with my father for over 20 years, except for a small blip that happened about 3 years ago. um, April of 2022, my mom, my son, and I flew back to California for my niece's quinceañera, and my dad and stepmom were there. Same, same stepmother. He's still married to her, although I don't know how she could have stood being married to him this long. Um, and because I had had enough healing at that time, when my brother texted me, California brother texted me and said, "Hey, I gave him your phone number because when my dad and stepmom were there, they were in their fancy pants RV because when they left town, they were not heading home. They were heading on the road for 3 months, and I knew that in about 6 weeks' time, he was going to be here in Michigan. And naturally, we were all back home in Michigan by then. My mom, my son, and my brother, or my mom, my son, and I. And I had taken time to go to where they were parked to hang out for a couple hours. My dad barbecued some burgers, but nothing had changed. Absolutely nothing had changed. My poor son and his girlfriend at the time, because I took her with us, literally, I don't think said 2 words a piece, not even to each other. My dad didn't hardly say anything. My stepmom was vomiting, word vomiting all over the place about people I don't know and don't give a shit about. Literally, I had not been in that dynamic in over 20 years with my father and my stepmother. Literally, nothing had changed. And what really got me to decide, you know what, fuck it. I'm not going to worry about the fact that he has my phone number. I could always ignore texts. I could always block him. I no longer cared because not once did my father attempt any sort of conversation with his grandson. And my son is my parents' only grandson. My niece is their only granddaughter. They only have two grandchildren. Michigan brother hasn't had children of his own. He did help me raise my son, thank God, and he's been great at that. But his only grandson. Now, I have a stepsister. I had a stepbrother. Sadly, he died in a car crash when my niece was about 1 or just shy of her first birthday. Um, so this would have been 20 years ago, roughly. Um, but he already had 2 kids, and then my stepsister had her son about 6 months before my son was born. I don't remember his birthday, but clearly my father prefers the grandchildren from his new marriage instead of his own grandchildren, because he did not engage in conversation with my son once. And I'm like, you know what, fuck it. You're not going to take the opportunity to get to know your grandson. I made the right decision not encouraging that, because my son deserves a lot better, and I didn't want him to grow up with that kind of an influence. So, it's all good. But let's keep rolling. So, nothing had changed. Now I lost place in my notes here. The fact that my son, yeah, only grandchildren. Technically, he only has my son and my niece. Okay. It was after that day that I decided that I was going to revert back to my normal. I was not going to reach out to him anymore. And, let him reach out first if that's what he wants. I didn't care. Not surprisingly, there was very little contact in the 2 years that had passed between, or 2.5 years that had passed since my niece's quinceanera and the final showdown, if you will, between me and my father on November 4th, 2024, the day before the election. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there. I am going to lose followers for this, and I do not care. Do not come into the comments and argue with me about this, about my political stance, what I'm about to share with you, because I legitimately do not care. And if you are rude and nasty about it, I will simply block you. I have no patience with anything in my life at this point. My main focus is to get back on my feet and rebuild my life, because I need to rebuild my life from scratch. So, you can do what you want with that, but I'm going to do what I want, and that is I'm going to ignore it and block you. So, like I said, this came to a head on November 4th, 2024, the day before the election, and I'm going to read the exchange. And for those of you who disagree with me politically, again, just stop watching this podcast. I don't give a shit. I've got much more important things to focus my time, attention, and energy on than engaging with any of that bullshit. So, and you'll understand why November 4th is important here in just a second. So, November 4th, I woke up that morning with 2 text messages, one from my father, one from my son. We'll circle back to the one from my son in a moment. And I wrote this down because when this all happened, I had to get everything off my phone. Originally, I was going to screenshot the text thread and then, excuse me, so that I could still have it, but somehow still even just having that on my phone. So I wrote everything out word by word, made sure everything was exactly as it was typed out from my father and from myself, because I needed to get it all completely off my phone. I blocked him that day, and I am not looking back. So here we go. My father's text. Have you voted, or are you voting? It better be Trump. Okay. It's in my notes. I'll wait and save that thought for a minute. So, this is what I responded. I can assure you that there is no reality in which I would vote for that man. He is a misogynistic, racist, homophobic, transphobic rapist who only cares about staying out of prison at this point. He's openly said that he will be a dictator on day one, and I love my country far too much to allow that to happen. He's openly against women's reproductive rights, which concern me greatly as a woman who has a family history of uterine cancer. My mother. Her current round of cancer that she is currently dealing with, we believe, stems from that uterine cancer roughly 16 years ago. And he will not stop at abortion slash miscarriage, contraception, and IVF. So, if Pervert Hoover does win, let's hope I never need life-saving surgery for uterine, cervical, ovarian, and or breast cancer. And his deportation claims mean that my niece, your granddaughter, could end up living in Mexico despite the fact that she is a natural-born citizen of this country. I mean, seriously, how the hell do you deport somebody who was born in fucking Sacramento, California? Here's the kicker. And the fact that you had the fucking audacity to text me that on my birthday is sadly no surprise. This was his response. And this ended the conversation. I am very sad for you and your thinking. May God forgive you. Bye! Exclamation point on the bye. Yeah, my birthday is November 4th, and that's what I got from my father. The text I said was waiting for me from my son, he texted it when he got to work that day just to wish me a happy birthday, even though we live in the same house and we were all sitting down for my birthday dinner that night. My mom went and got my grandmother, my brother was there, Michigan brother. They both sent, my son and Michigan brother, they sent me texts when they were at work, even though I saw them that night. My birthday, my father can't even wish me a happy birthday. He tells me, oh, you better vote for Trump. And when I explain why I won't, he feels bad for me. I know, it's ridiculous. So the key thing I want to mention here is that what I felt that day when I first read that text, quite literally for the first time ever in my life, I did not have that knot in my gut about having to speak up for myself. You know, I just mentioned earlier, I usually needed my mom's help in these types of moments. Okay. So, therefore, I didn't ask her for help. In fact, my immediate response to that was, okay, what am I going to say to this? How do I want to say what I want to say? Schemy fingers. And I mean, I was excited for the first time in my life. And the fact that it took me a week to recognize that that was my immediate reaction to seeing the "are you voting or have you voted, it better be Trump" text from my father. That was my immediate reaction for the first time in my life. And I knew then that I have legitimately healed a lot of that pain to respond instantly in that way, as opposed to, okay, what do I say? What do I say? I'm freaking out. I need help. Mom, help me. You know, nope. I just immediately went to, okay, how are we going to, how am I going to respond to this? And I wasn't disappointed in his response. I mean, I thought it was quite amusing and, you know, typical. Typical. We'll just put it that way. And as far as that is concerned, I also realized for the first time in my life that things are overall a lot more peaceful. And the reason why I did not have that knot in my stomach was that I think I instinctively knowing that this was going to be the last of it because of how I was going to respond to him. I was not going to take it lying down. I'm still riding that high. Let's just put it that way. I'm still riding that high of how well I responded to that. But this really has been the first time in my life that, as anything pertains to my father, that I actually feel calm. That knot in my stomach that he's going to pop up out of nowhere, I didn't realize I had been carrying it the entire time I had been no contact with him up until seeing him again at the quinceanera 3 years ago. So, oh, I got a note here. Just to kind of clarify what I mean by that knot in my stomach, just kind of, waiting for the other shoe to fall. if that makes sense. Um, I felt like I was finally able to let go of that anxiety. Like I said, the anxiety of never knowing what was going to walk through the door when he got home from work, the anxiety of never knowing when I would get into trouble for something that, even as a parent myself, never made sense to me as to why I was in trouble. It, whatever. It's done. It's gone. It's over with. Finally, and on my 53rd birthday. So there was a lot of poetic justice in that, I felt. Anyway, let's pull this back to Harry's story for a moment, specifically from last week when he had his first potions class with Snape. It's easy for me to imagine just how abusive Snape's behaviors were towards Harry. Um, and also, it's very easy for me to imagine the level of anxiety Harry had every time he had a potions lesson. I felt that every time I had to go to my father's for his stupid parental visitation. I just have always had this knot in my stomach and having to psych myself up. Okay, I got to spend time with my father, and then the amount of relief just, oh, thank God when it was over. I mean, that I can feel, if Harry were a real person, just how stressed and anxious just dealing with Professor Snape that had to have been for him, and having to endure that on a near daily basis myself, as much as Harry did. Um, yeah, that's how I've always imagined. Every time I read through the books, that's how I've always imagined Harry's frame of mind when having to deal with Snape. So let's jump back into my life for another aspect of my life that I pulled from this chapter. And it's more specific to Harry's decision to show up for the duel with Malfoy. And that is standing one's own ground versus walking away. Now, Harry and Ron could have decided to just not show up and hope that Malfoy would get into trouble, but given the fact that Harry now has a friend to encourage and inspire him, Harry chose to stand his ground, something I'm certain that ties directly to the abuse that he had endured for 10 years with the Dursleys. Whenever he'd speak up for himself, he was always shot down, not unlike my own experiences with my father. But now he has the chance to stand up for himself with some help, specifically Ron. He never had anyone at the Dursleys to back him up the way he did with Ron at Hogwarts. So I imagine that Harry felt stronger and more capable of doing so than he had ever done before, because I know I certainly would, and I have had moments, but those are still kind of murky because of all the trauma and everything, and the dissociation that comes with that. Um, but I know that I have had moments throughout my life where I have had somebody that I trust, that I knew had my back, and that just their presence in the situation alone was enough for me to be bold, to be braver than usual. So, excuse me. Um, so, how does this apply to me? First off, I want to mention that my need to overshare is deeply ingrained in my psyche. So, let's talk about the psychology of that for a moment. Um, the need to explain or oversharing survival strategy, childhood abuse, and hypervigilance. Growing up in an abusive environment often means constantly monitoring others' moods and reactions. This can create a deeply rooted need to justify your actions or feelings, hoping to avoid conflict or further harm. Over time, this survival strategy can become a reflex, even in safe situations. You might feel compelled to explain yourself to preempt misunderstanding or criticism. Yeah. Now, let's add my autism to the mix here. Autism and communication differences. Many autistic people experience frequent misunderstandings because of their communication style, sensory needs, or behavior which may not align with neurotypical expectations. And this can lead to a lifelong pattern of being questioned or doubted, reinforcing the urge to clarify or defend your intentions. So, for me at this point in my life, this is my normal state of being. And when the other person seems bound and determined to misunderstand me, or that I'm being difficult, such that I do not adequately explain my side of things in the conversation, it definitely leaves me feeling irritated and frustrated. And this story is one in which I did the opposite. I didn't overshare. I didn't keep going. I didn't keep pressing just for the satisfaction of the other person understanding my perspective and where I'm coming from. I stepped back. This for me was this was a good one. So, it has to do with a friend that I had for about 20 years. We're going to call her Mary, with my finger quotes. Not her real name, obviously. I'm not going to do that to people. We met at work and we instantly hit it off and were good friends for quite some time. However, after I had moved back to Michigan here in 2009, things became clear to me that I was slowly beginning to realize that she was not as good a friend to me as I needed. And it was the typical imbalance of give and take. I would always make an effort to be there for her via text, email, FaceTime, whenever she needed it. But whenever I needed it, she was always very busy and never responded to any of my follow up messages, which was usually my schedule of availability. Hey, let's look at it through the next week. Here are my openings for the next week. Hoping she would come back in and, oh, this works for me or this works for me. Let's make a plan. And she never did that. She would get the mail. Here's when I'm available for the next week. Anyway, this all came to a head in 2020 when just days after the George Floyd murder and the Black Lives Matter protests, she had shared a post from a Facebook friend of hers that, in my opinion, was in very poor taste. Very poor taste, because that was posted, if I remember correctly, less than a week after George Floyd's murder, and was kind of related to that. And that's when I unfriended her first on Facebook. So it was in 2020, so about the end of May rolling into June, because I think George Floyd was in May. I probably should have researched this more. My apologies if I get that wrong, but let's just keep going. I'm sorry if I get it wrong. Because I needed to take a mental step back, and that was the only way that I could feel like I really had that mental step back, was just to unfollow her, so I didn't see her shit popping up on my Facebook feed and that kind of stuff, and give myself some time to organize my thoughts. Well, we're going to flash forward a year and 2 months when she DMs me to ask what happened about that friendship over on Facebook, because she had just noticed that we were no longer Facebook friends. And she noticed that because she was reaching out to tell me that she had gotten married again 2 months earlier. Now, I don't remember much of that original post. Like I said, I didn't screenshot it at the time, or I'd summarize it for you. But like I said, I do remember it being somewhat connected to George Floyd's murder and all the Black Lives Matter protests. And less than a week after George Floyd's murder was just in very poor taste. That's all I remember of it, because I didn't save anything from it. However, I did explain from the beginning And before I could get any further than needing to take that mental step back as to why I unfriended her on Facebook. So she got the part about George Floyd, she got about the part about the post that she had made, etc., etc. She shut things down in spectacular fashion. I mean, it was spectacular. She said that she had been nothing but a good friend to me all those years. We'll circle back to that in a minute. And never did she think that I would stop being friends because of politics. To be clear, it was not because of politics. It was because the friendship was clearly over. And reading that post that she had shared just days after George Floyd's murder and finding it in such poor taste and seeing this is a moral and ethical issue for me. That's what it was. Um, on top of the fact that just the friendship itself was clearly over and had been for over a decade. But here's where I made my decision. She essentially ended things there, and now I had a choice to make. I could keep doing what I always do, oversharing, or I could walk away. I mean, I could see that the friendship had been over for quite some time and was laying out my thought process for her in arriving to my conclusion of that. And I wanted her to understand me and where I was coming from. But um, and that's why I started with that post and why I felt it was inappropriate and a much bigger issue for me. But when I thought about it, I did consider that my attempts to be understood from that point on could potentially maintain that connection with her. And I didn't want to anymore. I really didn't want to. And I'm coming to that in just a minute. Um, I'm not going to lie, it did take a lot of work on my part to just keep my fingers off the keyboard and stay silent. If she's done at that point thinking it's about politics, let her think it's about politics. I don't need to explain anymore. So let's break down the two key issues with her assertion that she had been nothing but a good friend to me. First, the entire time I've been living in Michigan, which, as I said, has been since 2009, not once do I remember a time where when I needed her, she was there. And there was a lot. Okay, we're going to go back to my trauma event. She knows about David's death. And here's where she wasn't as good a friend to me as I was to her because of what I need in a friendship with somebody. She doesn't know about the PTSD and how long it has been going undiagnosed. Basically, she knew about the event, but not what it actually did to me. Um, the falling out that I had with the brief, reconnection with the two friends from high school, at toward when did that happen? Oh, it was about this time in 2018, through about the end of the year. Again, she knew about the falling out, but she didn't know what that did to me and how it shaped and shifted my life in that moment. The death of my cousin Sandy, that was in 2019. Again, Mary knew about Sandy's death, but not what that did to me. Those last two events, about the two high school friends and that brief reconnect, and then my cousin. This was a cousin mainly because I grew up in California. Even though I was born here in Michigan, the bulk of my family has been here in Michigan. I didn't get a lot of time with certain family members growing up, and my cousin Sandy was one of those. She's actually my first cousin once removed, so she's in my mom's generation of that. Um, but in 2016, 2017, something like that, she and I did start getting closer, and she was a safe person for me to talk to. She was somebody who understood a lot of my struggle and what I had been going through. And with those two high school friends, one of the two, it was the same thing. So for a brief moment, I actually had people to talk to who understood me, who listened to me, who didn't tell half the county like my mother does. She cannot keep her stupid mouth shut, which is why I don't tell her anything anymore. So Mary doesn't know just how devastating these events were. She knew about the events, but not how devastating they were to me. And that's when I started seeing, even way back in the beginning, how unbalanced that was. And it was the same old story for me. I'm always giving more than I'm getting. I'm giving the support. I'm there at the drop of a hat if anybody needs me. But when it's my turn, oh, they're too busy or whatever. So those are the three biggest events that to me showed me more than anything that Mary was not a good friend. And part of this is on me, and I won't deny that. I am autistic, which means that I'm an empath, highly sensitive, strong pattern recognition skills, to name a few. And as such, I crave depth in my relationships. Which, among other things, means that knowing about the events is not enough for me. I need my friends who actually know what those events did to me, the aftermath, the fallout of that, and the effects that those moments have had on my life. And there was none of that there with Mary. So the second thing, and I trust that there may come a time that I get to voice this to her directly, but if she really valued our friendship that much, the way she was implying in her response to all of this, why did she wait over a year to tell me no? My thoughts got confused. Why did she wait over a year to notice? And she only noticed because she told me she got married 2 months after she had gotten married. Why was there no invite? Why was there no, hey, Gabe, if you can afford it, if you can make it out here, I would love for you to be here. Or even just telling me ahead of time, hey, I had a little bit of money at that time because I was still in school. And extra financial aid money, I could have bought her a present or something like that. Again, showing me that she was not the good friend she claimed to be. It took her over a year to notice that I had unfriended her, and she only figured it out when she told me about getting married 2 months after the fact. And yet she's all butthurt there. That you get my point. And it's interesting to me because, and I'm just looking at my notes here again, it's interesting to me because she's always told me how much she trusts me when needing to talk about certain things, because I don't judge. I ask questions that make her think. I don't blab to other people. And I would love to ask her why that was never returned and why she waited so long to tell me she had gotten married. But again, I trust that it's going to be there. So I want to give you some more psychology here, because I think it's important for everyone who, like me, tends to overshare because they are often misunderstood by those around him. As always, my references will be in the show notes. So, standing your ground and what it means for you. Reclaiming your narrative. For someone with your background, standing your ground isn't just about refusing to back down. It's about asserting your right to exist and to be understood on your own terms. It means valuing your perspective even when others dismiss or misinterpret it. Navigating the urge to explain. While explaining yourself can be a way to seek understanding, it can also become exhausting and feel like you're always on trial. Yeah, it does. Standing your ground might involve recognizing when further explanation is not necessary, such as with Mary a few years ago. and giving yourself permission to let misunderstandings stand if others are unwilling to listen. Self compassion. It's important to acknowledge that the need to explain is rooted in both trauma and a genuine desire for connection. Standing your ground can also mean being gentle with yourself when you feel this urge rather than judging it as weakness. So, that leads me to the final topic for this week's episode, rule breaking. Again, I need to mention my autism and childhood trauma play key parts in this. So, neurodivergent people, especially those who are autistic, often experience a frustrating double standard when it comes to rule breaking. Others may break the rules without serious consequences, while our autistics are more likely to be punished for the same behavior, and several factors contribute to this dynamic. Autistic people tend to have a strong attachment to rules and routines. Hermione Granger? Research shows that rule breaking causes higher levels of distress for autistic individuals compared to neurotypical peers. Their brains show heightened activity in regions linked to emotion and cognitive processing when a rule is violated. This means that when autistic people do break a rule, it's often noticed either because it's rare or because their reaction to the situation is more visible. Social perception and communication differences play a major role. Autistic individuals may not always pick up on the unspoken social rules or the subtle ways others bend the rules. When they do break a rule, their actions might be more literal or direct, making them stand out, whereas neurotypical peers might break rules in socially accepted or less noticeable ways. Bias and misunderstanding from authority figures. Teachers, parents, or supervisors may interpret autistic behaviors as intentional defiance or disruption, rather than as misunderstandings or responses to stress. This can lead to disproportionate discipline for autistic people, even when their behavior is similar to that of others. Difficulty masking or explaining intent. Many autistic people struggle to mask their behavior or explain their intentions in a way that satisfies authority figures. When a neurotypical person breaks a rule, they might be able to charm or talk their way out of trouble. Autistic individuals may not have that same social flexibility, leading to harsher consequences. And then finally, we got rigid enforcement of rules for some, flexibility for others. There's often an unspoken social hierarchy that gives some people more leeway to break rules. Autistic people who are already seen as different may be held to stricter standards, while others are given the benefit of the doubt or allowed to explain themselves. So, in summary, autistic people are often punished more harshly for rule breaking due to their visible distress, communication differences, and social biases, even when their actions are no different from those of their peers. This double standard can be deeply frustrating and isolating. Amen to that, let me tell you. Reinforcing the sense of being misunderstood or unfairly targeted. In our discussion today, this would more likely apply to Malfoy, as much as I hate to admit it, especially when he sees Harry and Ron in the Great Hall the following morning, as being unjust. However, referring back to last week's episode, Harry's definitely experiences this with Professor Snape, who clearly favors his own students over those in the other three houses. And the reason why this all kind of came up for me about the rule breaking was just think about last week's episode in Harry's first potions class with Snape, and the feeling that Snape really hates him. And when he asked Hagrid about it, clearly Hagrid knows something that's going on. So poor Harry is like, why does this teacher hate me so much? And, taking points from Harry because Neville got his potion wrong. And why didn't you tell Neville to fix it, Potter? That kind of a thing. And that's why I wanted to get into that discussion. It was something I should have put in last week, but we talked about bullies last week, and for me, that was a really heavy episode to navigate. But I did want to talk about this because we do see rule breaking, obviously, in this chapter, and I thought, coming off of last chapter, this would be a good place to put it. So, oh, that was a lot to unpack this week. So, next week we're going to dive into chapter 10, Halloween. And until then, watch out for Mrs. Norris. Have a wonderful week, everyone.